I have with me here two virtually identical bottles of wine. They're from the same producer, they're from the same region, Rioja Alta, and they're the exact same blend of grapes. Tempranillo, Garnacha, Graciano, and Mazuelo. And yet, these are very different wines from one another. And what makes them so different? The vintage. Hey, what's up? It's Madeline Puckette from winefolly.com, where we learn by drinking. Vintage variation is the single hardest thing to accept about wine, period. I grew up in a world where when I got a product, it was a carbon copy of the exact same product that everyone else got. So the idea that wine can be different every single vintage blew my effing mind. I have with me here today 2 bottles of wine, both from just 1 year apart, from the same producer. Alright, so wine number 1, the 2009. This one looks to be a deep garnet color. It's definitely orange on the rim. It's a 10-year-old wine, so that seems pretty reasonable to expect, and it's also mostly Tempranillo, so that's another characteristic I'm pretty familiar with. When I compare it to the 2010, they look virtually identical, except for one slight difference. The 2009 looks a lot more aged. Let's give number 1 a smell, and that's the 2009. On the nose, wow. This smells like V8 juice, a baseball glove, and a cigarette. The 2010. This one smells like raspberry sauce, a wet clay brick, and dried tobacco leaves. Okay, let's give 2009 a taste. On the palate, the wine is very balanced from front to back. I get more of these savory flavors of the tomato going to more raspberry notes, and then a really rigid, prickly tannin on the texture. Let's taste 2010 because I need something to compare it by. Here we go. So this one has a lot more fruit in the flavor. Less of that savory tomato and much more in the raspberry sauce realm. The mid palate is a lot richer. It has more of these sort of tart raspberry notes, and then the tannins are a lot lighter, and I can feel maybe a little higher alcohol on the finish. 2 wines, very different smells, very different tastes. I wonder which one you would prefer. But what's interesting is what happened in 2009 versus 2010. 2009 was a vintage that got pretty normal start, and then towards the end of the year there were rains in the region and a lot of uneven ripening in the berries, and that's probably why this wine has so much more tannin. And then it also has this sort of like cooked sort of V8 tomato juice flavor, so some of the grapes must have been really ripe and some were kind of underripe, or maybe the physiological ripeness in the skins and the seeds wasn't quite as ripe. So we're tasting that in the wine, and we're tasting a lot of things going on, being pulled in different directions. I think maybe fundamentally if you were to rate this vintage, you might think 2009 was not perfect. Certainly rain in the region late in the harvest is a bad sign. Usually the grapes will plump up and make really flabby wines, but I think this wine is actually really excellent, so I don't have a problem with it so much. Then in 2010, they had a really late start to the year, and what that means is when the flowering and the fruit set doesn't happen until later in the year, you have less time to sort of get to ripeness and to become ready to make grapes. And what you really want is a long growing season that's just uninterrupted, and the grapes are really happy and growing perfectly, and you're getting rain early on, but not so much rain at the end. This 2010 was a very good vintage in that respect. In most ways, it was a pretty hot vintage. Overall, though, I think this one would appeal to a lot more people because it has more fruit-forward flavors. It has a much more subtle tannin. It might have even slightly less acidity, and again, a boosted alcohol level. As far as aging both of these wines, I'm not sure. I would try aging them both. They're both really interesting wines, and they're changing really in an interesting kind of a way. Anyway, that's my spiel on vintage variation. I would encourage you to accept it as like the reality of what happens in wine is that they change all the time, and then hopefully that won't cause you so much distress chasing that perfect dragon. We all know that perfect dragon. Anyway, if you love what we're doing, definitely subscribe, winefolly.com/subscribe. We've got a super awesome free newsletter with lots of tips and tricks like these. All right, until next time, tell me what you're drinking and what I should be drinking next. Peace out.